The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is the United Podcast Network.
And welcome to the Writer's Block Podcast. I'm Mandra Biscrenay, and I believe everyone has a story to tell. What's yours?
I'm Deborah Monk, empowering people to find their creative voice.
And I'm Shelley Devlin, inspiring you to find your why.
What the heck?
What the heck? What?
Shelley's somewhere.
Shelley is the only
Hello.
Shelley's the only person who didn't change
Hey.
her. I didn't put her headphones up.
Hey, I'm Shelley Devlin, inspiring you to find your why.
How about we find our way to our why?
I like it. I like
I'm
it.
sorry.
We just want to find her voice. That's all we want to find.
Exactly.
I love it.
Well, we have an exciting show for you today because we are diving into a literary genre that we haven't covered yet. Children's books and poetry. And to help us do that, you probably just heard his voice, we have with us today Matt Forrest Esenwine.
Very good.
Thank you for coming on.
People always think it's a much harder name to pronounce, and when I tell them Esenwine,
Yeah.
oh yeah.
Well, I thought
Exactly.
it was Esenwine, and then then I was thinking too much about it. I'm like, I got to remember to ask him, so I get
Yeah,
it
I never
right.
thought it was a difficult name, but like when I was growing up, we would get mail, and even myself as an adult, we would get mail addressed to all different kinds of people. It would be ESS, WEIN, or Entwistle, Erzenwing, and Eisenstein. My father was the selectman in town in Ware, and one time he got a letter addressed to him from the state of New Hampshire. Okay, the state addressed to Forrest Esenwine. They must have seen they must have seen it handwritten. We can only assume. They saw it
right, because the
and they saw the W and the
looked
I,
like a
and
U.
they instead of saying, "Oh, it's obviously a W," no, it's the state. They're like, "Oh, it's obviously a UR."
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's my favorite.
Well, I'm glad I got it right.
That's my favorite iteration of the name. Thank you.
Well, Matt's poetry has been published in various collections, including the upcoming Donald Hall tribute anthology, Except for Love. Your 2012 poem, Apple Stealing, was nominated for a Pushcart Prize. And your children's poetry can be found in anthologies that you have here with us today, the National Geographic Book of Nature Poetry and the Poetry of Us.
Right there. You see?
Yes.
Zoom in.
Zoom in on that.
Are we zooming? Are we zooming?
It's got it.
We're zooming.
And
There we
are.
are. There we
are.
go. Yay.
And then we also have your picture book, Flashlight Night. And one of my favorites that I was reading to my son, Don't Ask a Dinosaur.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You get that one?
Yeah, he's got
he's got it up there.
He's got it.
Okay,
Great,
there
thank
right
you.
now.
Yes, and I actually just found out last week that the Derry Public Library, together with the Robert Frost Farm Board of Trustees, they offer a thing called the McGregor Poetry Prize, or the McGregor Poetry Contest, and they have submissions all over the state. And I just found out I won.
Nice. Congratulations.
Thank you. So I'll be
So will you
submitted
be speaking there?
Yeah, it's a
Great.
poem titled Stumpfield Pond, 1975. It's a poem about my father taking me fishing over in Stumpfield Pond in Hopkinton, back when I was knee-high to nothing.
Yeah.
And so there's a cash prize. They're going to have the poem on display at the library. I'll be doing a reading with some of the other finalists at the library, I think May 18th.
Excellent.
And then I was told I'm also going to be part of the summer reading series at the Frost Farm.
Nice.
So that, I just found out a few days ago.
Matt, how do you find your muse when it comes to writing a poem? Is it somebody just says, I need something about this topic, and it just comes out?
And a poem for children.
For anything, really. I will try to make a long story a little less long. When I first started writing, and I've been getting published since actually high school. I think I was about a sophomore or junior. I wrote a free verse poem. I submitted to the Henniker Review, which is a literary mag for New England College in Henniker. And they accepted it, and so I got published. Not like you make any money off of it, but it's kind of cool.
But it's still published.
And so throughout the years, I've had a lot of sort of adult-leaning poetry, and I say adult poetry, and you'd be surprised how many people, when they hear adult poetry, they think, oh, adult poetry?
Like
Oh, they
Not
think it's
that kind of adult poetry.
There was a lady from Nantucket.
Right. I mean, poetry geared for
Adults.
you know. So
I guess you don't need to add the adult. I think you might just say poetry.
Well, right. But I mean, as someone who writes a lot of children's poetry, I feel the need to differentiate.
Then you add the children's, yes.
Segments
Right.
is
right, exactly. So I've been getting published in different literary journals and places like that, some anthologies over the years. But all you get, and it's great to be published, but pretty much all you actually receive tangibly is a hearty attaboy and a free copy, and that's it. And whatever prestige might come with it, if there is any. But for children's poetry, you're actually getting paid. This is a career, and you get paid for what you do. So for the longest time, as far as your question. For the longest time, I would just write when I was inspired, like most people do. You just sit around and suddenly inspiration hits, and I'll start writing. And
so how often did that happen?
I mean, just quite a bit.
Okay.
I mean, but it wasn't like I was searching for an idea, or I'm struggling with trying to come up with something to write. I would just write whenever I felt like writing. But when I left full-time employment in 2012. I was working full-time at a radio station group, and I realized between daycare and gas, I was netting about $150 a month.
Oof.
I told my wife, I said, this is insanity. I can stay at home, be a stay-at-home dad, and I can work on my writing, and I do voice work, produce commercials and corporate narration, things like that from the home. So, we realized that if I stayed at home, I could make, $400 to $500 a month. We actually broke even. So
right.
Who wouldn't do that? So when I started actually getting into the children's writing, and I really was trying to make a concerted effort to write whenever I could and try to come up with ideas. And there are a lot of different ways of sort of spurring that imaginative spark that you've talked about before. But a lot of times, you can't just wait for inspiration. You can't wait for the muse. You got to smack the muse upside the head and say, get going.
Paycheck coming.
Right. And I have found over the years, particularly maybe the last 5 years or so, that I am much more capable of writing something pretty good. I mean, I'm my own worst critic, but I found that I'm much more capable of writing something solid if I am given a very specific subject rather than a wide subject. If you tell me to write a poem about the night sky, I could, and I have, but that's a pretty big, broad subject, and so there's all kinds of things you could do, and then you start wondering, well, should I do this? Should I do that? This or nah. If you tell me, okay, write a star about Betelgeuse, the upper left shoulder star of Orion. Okay, well, that narrows it down. Now I can start kind of seeing what is about the star Betelgeuse that makes it.
I didn't even know Betelgeuse was a star. I thought it was a movie.
Right, it's not spelled the same way. But that's where they got the name for the movie, is the star Betelgeuse.
So is that how it works? Are you asked to write a poem about something specific? Like, hey, we need a
9 times out of
bus
10.
driver poem.
Yeah, 9 times out of 10, that's the way it is.
But do you ever ask yourself to write a poem about something specific? Is that another way to trigger that muse?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, I had written a poem. I actually wrote it 2 or 3 years ago, and I wasn't quite sure what to do with it. But Highlights magazine picked it up, so it's going to be coming out, I was told, in the next month or two. I think May or June. It's called "The Ballad of an Ice Cream Cone." Oh. And I was trying to think of something to write about the beach. We go up to York Beach all the time, usually for a week in the summer, and I just kind of wanted to write a poem about the beach, and I wasn't quite sure what to do about it. So I'm just thinking about images of the beach and spending time with the family and getting ice cream, and kids invariably lick the ice cream and it falls into the sand, and just that kind of got me thinking. Mm-hmm. And so then I was able to create this it's a 4 or 5 stanza poem about the stages of losing this ice cream cone.
That brings
ice cream cone, once in my hand. Now, what are you doing down there in the sand? Sure. Covered with sprinkles that, once I can't even remember how I wrote it. Once a delicious, creamy treat, and now you're covered in sprinkles that no one would eat.
How
do you know?
At my feet.
Right.
How do you know when the poem is finished? Now,
you never do. Never.
Oh, you never do.
You
That's
never
an
know when it's
interesting
finished.
question.
No.
But I love
I
the
mean,
answer.
I can get a sense of like it's pretty good.
And you
right
can
here,
let it go.
It's pretty good.
Well, like the ice
I'm
cream
comfortable
melted.
with it.
There's nothing more you're writing about it. It's melted. It's gone. So
Right,
the poem
but
must be over.
Right. Well, the poem's over. In that case, the poem is over because the kid, and again, it's all in rhyme, but the kid tries washing it off. And so it just makes it melt more. Oh, I've caused a disaster. Now the ice cream's melting faster.
Right.
And so, ice cream cone. Into the ocean you slip. I just hope the fish all like chocolate chip.
Nice.
And so it's done at that point.
cute.
Yes.
But you're constantly tweaking poems. I mean, the poem that I submitted for Except for Love, the Donald Hall anthology, I wrote that 3 or 4 years ago. And before I sent it off, I made some more tweaks. That I realized I'm not quite happy with this. This needs to be changed. I changed the enjambment, or I changed a word or a punctuation or something. The poem I submitted for the McGregor poetry contest at the Frost Farm Dairy Library, that one again, I was very comfortable with it. I wrote it actually for my father for a Father's Day gift. I think it was 3 years ago, because it's about him taking me fishing.
Yeah.
But I still wanted to make a few more changes. It's never completely done.
See, for me, once I print it out, I've deleted the file before. Print it out. I don't want to
Delete.
mess with it anymore. This is done. Delete the file.
Yeah.
Now I only have the hard copy. If I ever lose it, it's gone forever.
Right. No, I'm not a big fan of revisions. I should be. Revisions are the best part of the writing, because that's where you get to fine tune it and polish it and all.
But that's
It's
like saying
exhausting.
vegetables are
But
the
it
best
is.
part of the meal.
I know.
I mean, it might
That's
be
good,
true,
Deb.
most
They are.
healthy, but it's
Good.
not the best part.
Well, they're the best part. They may not be the tastiest part, but they're the best part. Like I'll tell you something. A few years ago, when I was working in radio, I came across a news article I had to share with the listeners. There was a study that was done on breakfast cereals and the popularity of breakfast cereals, what people are eating, and they said that I think it was the most popular cereal for purchases was Cheerios. When they asked, what is your favorite cereal? It was Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
Yeah.
So they said, this tells us a lot. It tells us
you
that
should
people
be eating.
are buying the Cheerios because they're healthy, but they would much rather have the Cinnamon Toast Crunch if they had their preferences. Yeah. So you could learn a lot from
Right.
understanding what's the difference between what do you like what do you like to do, or what do you
actually do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, for what if someone wanted to? We had a poet on a month or so ago, and for me, poetry is roses are red, violets are blue. You stink, and so do I. Or no, that's you do too. Well, whatever it is.
That's right. Debbie's not a poet.
Right,
Yes,
clearly.
yes, not.
Yeah, but
and she knows it.
Yes.
But what if she wanted to be? Like, what? How do you find? Is there a good book that would say are there poem structures like haiku?
Yeah.
Am I saying it right?
Haiku. Yeah.
I know that's one type. It's something like 3 syllables, 5 syllables, 7 syllables, and the rules are the first 2 lines relate, and then the third line is a surprise. Something like that.
Sort of. Yeah. That's very, very, very basic.
Rudimentary.
But, yeah.
Let's stick with rudimentary.
Well, it's in American parlance, it's 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables.
Okay, that's what I meant to say.
But the Japanese language does not have syllables the way we have syllables. Right. So if you read a lot of contemporary haiku these days, written by English-speaking world, you're not going to find 5 syllables and then 7 syllables, 5 syllables. You might find 2 syllables, 5 syllables, and 3 syllables.
But then wouldn't it not be called haiku?
It is, because it's about nature. Haiku is specifically about nature. Senryu is kind of the same thing, only Senryu tends to be more geared to emotion. So if you're
How
writing,
do you spell that?
Senryu. I mean, there's all sorts of variants to it. There's the tanka, which is actually predates the haiku. The haiku came along centuries after the tanka, which again is it's a 5-line version of a haiku. You have the sudoku, which is like
annoying math puzzles.
Right,
in the back.
right. No, it's much. I can't stand sudokus. This is sedoka. So it's 3 lines and then 3 lines, but they often are conversing with each other. So like the
Right.
first stanza says something, the second one kind of relates to
Responds
it.
on
Call
it.
and
But are
answer.
you
But so if
asking
we
if there
put
has
this
to be
all-
a structure? Because
No,
I don't
well,
know.
no,
Right,
I'm
right. And
asking-
none of this is free verse. I mean, this is all structured poetry.
Right.
So
Is
free verse is a
free
whole
verse
other
is-
Is
language.
free verse considered poetry?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, it is. Okay, so if
I mean, you
for-
have rhyming verse, structured verse,
That's what
metrical verse, which can all be kind of the same thing, and you have free verse, which is.
So
which is
I
okay.
so the
and then
only
you have blank
ones-
verse. I mean, you have all kinds of verse.
Blank page.
I'm well versed in verse.
So so for me, who only knew haiku and rhyming, neither which appeal to me specifically, would I be tempted to try to write. So is there a good book that will just give you like poetry for dummies that would give you an introduction to the different versions?
There's a lot of them out there. The one I would mention, not because I'm in it, but because it was written by a good friend of mine, and it's geared, if I can find it, it's geared for educators. I'll hold this up. This one, it's called Poems Are Teachers, and it was written about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. Is geared for educators to learn how to teach poetry.
Yeah.
And so you can take a look at that.
Okay.
And what it is, it breaks down all sorts of, well, the premise behind the book is that if you can learn how to write various types of poetry and you learn the devices that writers use, it strengthens all genres.
True.
Poems, you can be dealing with things like perspective and voice and alliteration and metaphor and all these different, speaking in two voices, all these different poetic devices. And there are examples of all of them. Amy Ludwig van der Water is a children's poet. She's got a number of children's books out. She and she does a lot of teaching of poetry. And so she had asked me if I would write a poem about a poem that was in two halves. She said it didn't necessarily need to be two people talking to each other, but just a stanza and then another stanza, or however I wanted to structure it, but a poem in two distinct parts. So I wrote a poem called Soccer Sides, and the first one is a child talking about being on the offense, and then the second stanza is the child talking about being on defense.
So, Matt, you said that you don't have an agent. So
Right.
how do you spend a lot of your time then needs to be spent on finding these avenues to get your poetry out?
Yes.
Is that the hardest part?
Um,
Because it looks like you have a blast
I don't know if it.
creating this poetry. Now you need to find an avenue.
Right. Well, I don't know if it's the hardest part. It's definitely a hard part. I have, I've made a lot of connections over the years, which helps. Making yourself known, and
Kind of building a network.
Yeah, I'm familiar with marketing and promotion. I mean, I'm not a big person to try to promote myself, but you kind of have to.
Right.
Having spent years in radio, I was on the air, but I was also I was doing all kinds of remote broadcasts or emceeing
Right.
concerts and things like that. And writing commercials and working with clients to develop their campaigns. So I understand advertising and marketing and that sort of thing, and the need to get your name in front of people, and the need to be resilient and tenacious. You can't just send out if you've got a manuscript. I know people, and I feel awful for these folks. I mean, I've got good friends who've written a manuscript. They send it out to one publishing company. The company says they're not interested. Oh. I'm awful. I should never have done this in the first place. And they're done.
Yeah.
Right.
It was a good story.
Right,
Just
keep going.
Keep going.
Send it.
And honestly, people ask me like, how do you just you keep getting all these rejections because Don't Ask a Dinosaur.
Yes.
Don't Ask a Dinosaur went through 14 different publishers.
Wow. Really?
Publishers and agents before we found the publisher who wanted it. Now that's not that many. I have another book coming out. Which I can't announce yet because it's not it's a done deal, but it's not like officially announced, so I can't say anything.
Gotcha.
But it's coming
Check
out.
hasn't cleared yet.
Right. We have to wait for the publisher to give us the okay. You know, they're going to announce it in Publishers Weekly, so we have to wait for that. But it's a book that I co-wrote with one of the nicest guys in Kid Lit. He's highly esteemed. The fact that I was able to write this together with him, and we've never met in person, but we're really good friends. And I'm so honored to be able to have written this. It's coming out next fall, and we must have sent that thing to like 20, 25 different places.
Okay.
And everybody in Children's Lit knows this guy, and it still took 20, 25 places. So you can't just send it out and sit back and say, "Oh well." I guess I should never have done this. You got to stay with it.
Right.
Yeah. I've had people ask me, like, how do you keep doing that? I said, honestly, guys don't know what the word no means. You're interested? Okay, I'll send it to this person. No, you don't want the manuscript? I'll send it to this person over here. You just keep going. I said, I don't know if it's tenacity or ignorance, but I just
or both.
Right, or both. It probably is both. And I just keep at it and keep at it and keep at it. And fortunately, since I started getting involved with Kid Lit around 2009. I left the radio station in 2012 to really devote more time to it. And not like you can make a living off the bat. I mean, I'm not making a living off of this. But it's growing. It's getting better. Getting better. I turned a profit last year.
Nice.
So it's on the upswing. That's, yeah.
50 cents is 50 cents.
It is. It's actually $1.50, but
Nice.
But that sort of thing just it keeps building and building. And I've been in it long enough that I know a lot of the folks in the business. Lee Bennett Hopkins, who did I Am Someone Else, and School People over here.
Yep.
If I can grab it. School People. So Lee has done this, and he's done a number of others. There you go. Lee is in the Guinness Book of World Records for the number of children's poetry anthologies.
Wow.
He's close to 130 at this point.
And Matt, where can folks find you? Because we're
mattforrest.com.
Mattforrest.com.
2 T's, 2 R's.
Okay. That's great. Well, thank you so much for coming on our show and talking
Well,
about
you.
a topic that we hadn't dove
Yeah,
into yet.
that was
That was
great.
wonderful. Thank you all for listening to The Writer's Block. You can find us at the Writer's Block NH Facebook page or the Writer's Block podcast on your favorite podcast catcher. If you'd like to hear this episode again or share it with a friend, you can head on over to the UnitedPodcastNetwork.tv. Thank you again, and we hope to inspire and empower you to tell your own story.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.